Lately, I've been trying to send you stories every day, but I feel like a large number of people who have signed up almost never come back to listen to the stories. I don't know where that is. Make you unhappy? I hope to receive comments and suggestions from you, and if you find the video good, please give me a like to give me more motivation. For those who have not yet subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button and press notification bell to wait for the next story. Now let's get into the story. Story 1. This story occurred in the summer of 2008. I grew up in Oregon and was acquainted with the outdoors at an early age. My favorite hobby came to be hiking, particularly in areas that are either very dangerous or isolated. The health benefits of hiking were secondary to the thrills of walking to the edges of exposed cliffs, being in cougar and bear territory, and knowing that I was far from help. Into the Wild was released in the fall of 2007, and I immediately fell in love. Being a high school senior, I could barely go another week living in my parents' house. The movie spoke to my sense of adventure and inspired me to hike the California portion of the Pacific Crest Trail upon graduation. I made it from the Mexico border to Northern California without much incident. I saw rattlesnakes and black bears, experienced dehydration, but nothing happened that made me fear for my life. Somewhere in the Lassen National Forest in northeastern California, I walked around a bend in the trail, only to be startled by two people sitting on a rock, dressed in nearly all white. Their faces were dirty, their appearance disheveled, and the man had a long, unkempt beard. Both seemed to be in their 40s. They looked like the couple who kidnapped Elizabeth Smart. What struck me as odd about the encounter was encountering anybody at all. I frequently went days without seeing a single human being. Their white clothes could be explained away by the need to escape the California summer sun. Their scruffy appearance could be explained away by the fact that most thru hikers abandon personal hygiene on the trail. After I said hello, they said nothing and simply watched me as I passed. Even that I did not find odd. I chalked it up to them being foreign and not knowing what to say. I camped a few hundred yards off the trail that night, as I always did. Following their precautions, I hung the leftover food I had cooked that night from a tree approximately 5 feet off the ground. Packing up camp in the morning, I noticed the food wasn't there. I immediately thought a bear had entered my campsite, and so I began to look for paw prints. I didn't find any, but I did find boot prints circling the campsite. 2 pairs of them. One of those prints led right up to the rope from which the food was hanging. I thought of the couple I had passed earlier, and everything clicked. I quickly packed up and left. My mind was racing the entire day, but I figured the couple was simply hungry. If they had nefarious intentions, they would have come for more than the food. Several days passed, and my mind was at ease again. I had begun to circle my campsite with sticks to wake me in the event of an intruder, animal, or otherwise. I awoke in my tent one night to the sound of those sticks crunching. I grabbed my hunting knife. I tried to relax by telling myself that in the middle of nowhere, the source of that noise is much more likely an animal than a person. Then I heard frantic whispering. It was impossible to tell which direction the voices were coming from. Being in the dark, surrounded by trees, 100 miles from the nearest city, plays tricks on your senses. I debated yelling out, claiming to have a gun, but instead decided to be silent and retain the benefit of surprise. I heard footsteps circling my tent and was ready to slash at whatever opened it. But just like that, it was over. No more footsteps. No more whispering. I lied frozen awake in my tent until sunrise, and then opened my tent to find nobody there. The only evidence that something had actually happened were the boot prints, the same as before. Several more days passed, and I was now in Shasta National Forest, probably 50-75 miles from where I first encountered the couple. The trail became more or less a goat trail. Being on the side of a mountain and above the tree line, I could see the trail winding for miles in front of and behind me. I stopped for water in the rare shade and noticed two hikers miles behind me. All I could see were two white dots moving along the mountainside. I immediately said out loud, "This trip is over." I pulled out my map and looked for the nearest town, which appeared to be Casella, located off I-5. The only problem was that it was 25 miles away. I hiked well into the night, trying to gain as much ground as possible. I kept losing the trail and decided to set up camp, this time far off the trail and into the forest. I got in my tent and tried to sleep, but every little noise kept me awake. After a few hours in my tent, I heard the telltale signs of another bad night. The footsteps, the whispering, the sticks breaking. Sound travels far in the absence of other sound. I knew they were close, but wasn't sure how close. All I could think was, this is messed up. This is so messed up, damn it. Finally, a flashlight hits my tent, lights up the entire thing, and then goes dark. I unzipped my tent and climbed out carrying my knife, yelling nonsense into the dark. It was sort of like that cliché scene in movies where people in the wilderness hear sticks breaking around them and the camera pans around the trees because the people have no idea which direction the sound is coming from. Then I heard footsteps running towards the tent and barely made out a figure moving in my peripheral vision. I turned and ran deep into the forest. I tripped several times and ran into several trees. After running for approximately 5 minutes, I tripped again, rolled, and came to rest next to a downed tree. I got under the tree trunk and laid still. I saw the flashlight moving around in the distance. I laid under that tree for hours. I was certain they were gone, but I didn't move. Eventually birds started chirping and I knew sunrise would come soon. Once it did, I made my way back to the trail and walked the rest of the distance to Casella, where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses I-5. I hitchhiked my way to the town of Mount Shasta and spoke with the police and Forest Service. They put me up in a motel for the night, and my parents drove from Oregon to pick me up the next day. I followed up with the police and Forest Service months later, who told me that there had been similar reports of items disappearing from campsites throughout the surrounding national forests. However, there had been no other reports of the terrorizing that I experienced. As far as I know, the couple were never identified. Story 2. This happened in Antioch, California. It was around 2 a.m. I was at a friend's house, safe in warm, sheltered suburbia. We were having a lot to drink, chit-chatting, enjoying ourselves. Of course, when you're having fun, time hits the fast-forward button and those few minutes turned into an hour. I had too much to drink. My friend has a bit of an abrupt bedtime, so I had to dodge out early, still intoxicated. I felt too shameful thinking that I would be asking too much to stay in his house to sleep off the drunkenness. I suppose he was either too rude or too drunk to consider it himself. Whatever, sometimes a little inconvenience makes you appreciate everything else. I needed about another hour or so to sober up and drive back. As fast as time passed during my stay, it decided to drastically slow down as soon as I stepped out of his house. It was a cul-de-sac area, a concrete jungle with the stem of this street breaking into a fork. Alongside the road, my car was parked. The only street light that worked was in the middle of a cul-de-sac circle, about 80 yards away. I stumbled towards my car, produced my keys, felt the metal line up, opened my door, and shifted to the back seat. Because this was a dark, strange, and unfamiliar neighborhood, I took the leftover newspapers and a sweater in my back seat to cover myself up. I was a little scared. I wanted to camouflage myself and not just be some guy awkwardly sitting in his car, waiting for time to pass in order to drive home. I couldn't fall asleep. The uncomfortable feeling of a cheap back seat bed, enshrouded in darkness, didn't make the chance of slumber easier. It felt too ominous, and of course, my mind began to wander. I thought of worst-case scenarios, like how the police would shine their lights on me through the window, or a drunk driver hitting my car, and wait. In the distance, about 100 yards away, I could hear footsteps approaching, the gravel scuffed with each step forward, growing in proximity, but periodically taking stops. I wondered why until it made sense in my mind. Whoever it was probably looking through cars carefully with the intent to steal one. I couldn't recall how many cars were on the block, but I counted 3 full stops until he was at my window, breathing. I froze. There was no more than 1 foot between us. The car encapsulated me as I lay hidden beneath backseat clutter, forming myself into an object, trying my hardest to be unnoticeable, unmoving, and simply not there. "I see you," said a man in perverse baby talk. Imagine when you were playing hide and seek, and one of your friends tricks you into coming out. He said it in that tone of voice, as if baiting me, like he was questioning whether the clutter in the backseat was just clutter, or a person. I didn't want to move or check the window. I remained clutter. Give me an Academy Award. My body reacted by minimizing my breathing so much that I felt paralyzed. I dare not look. My eyes fixated on the back of the passenger seat. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard, it shook my body with each throb. He circled around the car. My ears didn't fail me. I heard the steps. I felt like I was part of the car. I could feel him touching the trunk as he carefully pressed down on it, as if to test the alarm, as if to test me. I was in the middle of fight or flight. I couldn't do either without elevating danger. I was frozen and hoping that he was bluffing. He circled the car again. The door handle to my right jiggled. He was pulling it multiple times. "I see you." Same tone, but more agitated and stressed. More convinced that he was trying to make that clutter move, revealing itself to be of his expectations. But it was me. My muscles tensed like a cow before slaughter. Tap, tap, tap. That had to be metal against glass. "Take a penny right now and tap your window." A crowbar. A knife. A rock. A gun. My eyes fixated on the seat in front of me, never averting my gaze like he was. I was covered enough to where I couldn't see beyond the seat in front of me. I know I couldn't see him, but I could feel his eyes resting on top of me. "My name is Poker Face." "What's your name?" The voice changed, a lower, demented, and serious tone. My mind forced a visual. It wasn't anything human. I already accepted my death. I was ready to be shot in the head. Ready to take a life-changing bullet. Multiple knife wounds. Just make this sleep bearable. Not excruciating, as you drain me of life. I wouldn't know how to react. My thoughts grew dimmer. I imagined my friend waking up the next morning after a calm night of safe and sound sleep, only to discover my mutilated, defiled, and bloodied body hanging outside my car door. It was then I heard nothing but my own heart. What was this person doing now? Just staring at me in the middle of the night. Talking to me. Or a messy pile in the back seat. Time froze. The footsteps were being swallowed in the distance. He left. I waited another hour until the sun showed hints of itself. I jumped in my front seat and bolted out of there, wide-eyed and sober. Story 3. Yesterday I was at my sister's house with my mom, watching my son and nephews play in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off of a tree when I remembered an odd encounter that I had as a kid. I said out loud, "This is so weird," thinking about the encounter. My mom inquired what I was talking about, so I told her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at the pine cone forest, which was what the neighborhood kids called a small patch of trees on the side of the road. I was picking bark off of one of the trees to pass some time, waiting for my friend Frankie to finish his homework and come out to play. Out of nowhere, it seemed, a man walked up to me. I could smell him before I saw him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke. I was a bit scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a very lazy eye that was cloudy, and his teeth and fingernails were stained yellow. My mom taught me to be nice to people, even if they didn't look like me, so I faked a smile and said hello. "What are you doing?" he asked me. The smell of his breath was the worst. I'm picking the bark off this tree." "You shouldn't do that. It's like picking off the tree's skin. How would you feel if someone picked off your skin?" he said while lightly pinching my arm with his sharp yellow nails. "I don't know," I replied and took my mom back. Just then Frankie's mom called for me out the door and told me to come and wait inside. I didn't think anything of the situation at that time. When I told my mom about it, she had this look of guilt. She said that it's probably time that I know the whole story. She thought I forgot about the whole encounter, so she never brought it up to me. First, you should know that the neighborhood I grew up in was a small, tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and there was no reason for an outsider to come in unless they knew someone there. So here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mom, Sonia, noticed a white van with no windows parked on the side of the road. I know, it sounds cliché. She didn't recognize it, but figured maybe it was a visitor for a neighbor. Sonia told the police that the van had been there all morning and afternoon. She was kind of just keeping an eye on it. She said she just had a bad feeling. Her house had a huge window in front facing the pine cone forest, and the van was parked next to it. She saw me waiting for Frankie and kept a constant eye on the van while holding the phone just in case. She saw the man exit the back of the van and walk up to me. As soon as she saw him approach me, she called the cops, and as soon as she got off the phone, she called me into her house. The cops stopped the guy just outside of my neighborhood. In the back of his van were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, and pictures of me taped all over the walls and ceiling. Me at school, at my grandparents' house, at the bank with my mom. Just me, everywhere I went. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him. Inside the unit, they found a cabinet full of knives. And I mean a lot of knives. There was also a few anatomy books, equipment, duct tape, and 10 empty 5-gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients, so it had wrist and ankle straps, and the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. My mom said that he was in a high-security mental institution for the criminally insane the last time she heard anything about him. Story 4. Back in 2007, shortly after my 15th birthday, my mom was out of town for a few days on a business trip. My mom and I lived alone in a small house in a neighborhood that was on the sketchier end of a decent city. And that fact, combined with her paranoia about me being home alone longer than 4 or 5 hours, meant that I had to stay over at a friend's house while she was gone. This friend's house was across the street, and one house over from my own. The place my mom was going was about 2 hours away, and I told her that I was old enough to take care of myself, and insisting that I could just check in with my friend's parents every now and then. But in truth, my house was pretty creepy at night, even when my mom was there with me. And I had found out the day that my mom was scheduled to leave that my friend had somehow gotten her hands on a PlayStation 3. So it didn't take me too long to get over being unfairly babysat. At around 11 o'clock on the last night I was there, we ended up back in my friend's room screwing around with a brand new flip phone that I had gotten for my birthday. Her parents had gone out hours earlier after buying us a pizza for dinner, and probably weren't going to be back for at least an hour. And we had gotten bored downstairs with her one PS3 game that we had been playing for days already. It was too late to call any of our friends, but I knew my mom was coming home tomorrow morning at some ungodly hour, and I knew that she had this thing about our answering machine. No matter how tired she was, no matter where she had gotten back from, if there were any messages on the answering machine, she would listen to all of them. Being the bored 15-year-olds we were, my friend and I decided to leave a message or two for my mom to find in the morning. We called my home phone and put it on speaker, cracking up and trying to figure out what our message was going to be about. It normally took 5 rings for a call to go to the machine, but on the 3rd ring, the phone picked up, and we hear, "Hello." The voice sounded like it belonged to some man who had been smoking for the last 40 years of his life. But even past that, there was this menace to his voice that I can't describe. It sounded very cold and very dangerous. The sort of voice where if you heard it on the street, you would want to get away from the person immediately. I looked at my friend. Her eyes were huge and her face was completely pale, and I'm sure I didn't look any better. Neither of us could get it together to say anything in response. "Hello," he said again. There was a pause, and I tried to squeak out something along the lines of, "Who the hell are you and why are you in my house?" But then he said in a very low voice, "You should not have called." There was some sort of slam and the call disconnected. I immediately dropped my phone and proceeded to freak out, as did my friend. She asked me if I knew who that was and I said no. Of course I didn't know the creepy guy answering my phone at 11 o'clock at night. We checked the call log to see if we had accidentally called the wrong number. Nope, it was the right number. We were so shaken up that we couldn't immediately figure out who we should call or what we should do. If we should call the cops, or call my mom, or call my friend's parents, or run around making sure all the doors and windows were locked, or what. So we ended up sprinting around my friend's house, double-checking every lock we could check, while gasping out what happened to my friend's parents on the phone. They were about 15 minutes away and said that they would call 911, and her mother told us to stay in my friend's room with the door locked and all the lights on, in case this guy was going from house to house. And so for 10 minutes we were huddled in the far corner of my friend's room, basically under her bed, jumping every time the house settled, or one of our legs scraped on the carpet. You can imagine how freaked out we were when her parents rushed in and started rattling at her bedroom door, forgetting that it was locked on their orders. The cops got to my house not too long after her parents got home. To be honest, I don't really remember a lot of the specifics about what the cops were doing, mainly because I refused to set foot outside the house. But I remember that they asked my friend and I a lot of questions. We couldn't really give them much information, unfortunately. We called from my friend's room, which was in the back of her house, away from where we would have been able to see my house. And the guy with the creepy voice isn't a very helpful description to go off of when looking for someone. One question they asked stuck out, because I remember thinking it was weird for them to ask who had the keys to get into the house. I told them only my mom and I had the keys. I found out later that the reason the police asked that was because there were no signs of forced entry anywhere around the house, and that the front door was wide open when they got there. There wasn't really anything messed up and nothing was taken, but our wall-mounted corded phone was hanging off the hook, and the phone base itself was cracked, like it had been smashed with something. Both my mom's room and my room also had some stuff moved around and displaced, like someone was going through our drawers and the stuff in our rooms. My mom was called at some point during all of this, and managed to get home that night, very tired and very freaked out about what had happened. The cops investigated the incident but never came up with any answers. We weren't doing too well financially at that point, but we still managed to move across town within a few months of this happening. For the months between that night and the day we moved though, I slept like crap and had really bad nightmares. I also flat out refused to be alone in that house, even for a couple of minutes, and started getting really obsessive about checking and double-checking the locks, a habit which has stuck around since this happened. And now that I have told you the story, I remember that there is one thing that I haven't told anyone else about this, mostly because at the time, I thought that the whole thing might get blamed on me if I said anything. Earlier that day, I had gone back over to my house to get a notebook of mine, full of writing that I wanted to show my friend. Nothing was obviously wrong as far as I could tell. The front door was locked when I got to it. No signs of any tampering with it, or any weirdness by the door. No noises from any part of the house. But the minute I stepped inside, something just felt off. Really off. It was really, really quiet. I was getting chills all up and down my spine, and I had goosebumps all over. I tried to will myself to just get over it, to go back to my room to get the notebook, but I couldn't make myself take more than a few steps into the house. I was too creeped out. I locked the door and ran back across the street. When I got back to my friend's house, I felt like an idiot, of course. Was I really such a wimp that I couldn't walk through my own house when it was empty? But looking back, well, who knows? Maybe my gut was right about something, just not being right. It freaks me out even thinking about what could have happened if I had ignored it and walked further inside. I have thought back on that moment a lot too, wondering if maybe I had left the door open when I left. But there's no way. I distinctly remember locking the deadlock and looking over my shoulders the whole time, because I had that burning, crawling feeling on the back of my neck that you get when you're being watched. And after that creepy call, I checked, and I had my keys in my backpack. Hey, this is Being Scared. I hope you're enjoying the video so far, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. I will never stop making these videos for you. Always with minimal ads. Alright, back to the stories. Story 5. If you ever want to hear some of the most messed up stories you'll ever find in your life, just ask the regular graveyard guy at your local all-night convenience store for some of the stuff they have seen. And bring some popcorn. In my life, I have been the graveyard guy for not one, not two, but 3 different 7-Eleven locations. And I'm going to bring the bulk of my horror stories to you, right now. This one is about a gentleman named Richard. Working the graveyard shift, I was the lone employee from just after 10 o'clock at night to just before 6 a.m. in the morning. Not only that, but the next nearest all-night anything was another convenience store over 2 miles away. From my store, you could just barely see the light pollution of their neon sign. This setup alone made for many interesting happenings, and tonight, it was a Saturday night, going into Sunday morning, just after 4 a.m., when a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a week-old stubble walked in. He wasn't unpleasant at first. He made small talk as he walked through the store, sometimes to me, sometimes to himself. He mentioned things about the weather. He asked about the hot dogs and the taquitos on the grill. It was what it was at first. But then, the comments started slipping in, minor vulgarities and weird things. After walking around the store for a good 20 minutes, he comes up to the register to check out, without anything to actually buy. I asked if he needed help with anything, and he asked me what I knew about the Antichrist. I exhaled. All right. Well, I know enough, I guess. I was raised Catholic, so I know quite a bit on this subject, I guess. And so, he just stares at me, eyes wide, mouth pursed. I wasn't sure if he was about to bite me on the face, or kiss me on the lips, and not being able to tell the difference made me uneasy. The man then said, I should get a hot dog. I responded, all right. Which one? One of the big ones. I want to enjoy it. There'll be no more hot dogs once the Antichrist comes. It sounds like a ridiculous statement. Okay, it is a ridiculous statement, but when said with genuine menace, it becomes a thinly veiled harbinger of doom. I did my best to ignore it, got his bread and his hot dog, and handed it over to him. He walked around to the condiment bar, and he continued, Do you have onions? Yeah, I love onions. Longer than necessary pause. Yeah, a lot of people do. They better enjoy them. There'll be no more onions once the Antichrist comes. There's really no way to respond to this, so I try to go back about my work. But even as I walk, as I stock cigarettes and start my nightly count, I can feel him watching every move that I make. He comes up to the register with his hot dog, pays, and I'm hoping that we are finally done. I then say to him, thanks for coming. You have a good night. And I turn my back. The man then responds, Can I leave this here? That's probably not a good idea. The manager comes in at about 5:30, and he doesn't like it if anyone's just hanging out in here. Stuff to do, you know. The man responded, I'm not worried about him. The crappy part about this is that I was actually partially lying. The manager, James, my boss, and a really awesome guy, did arrive somewhere between 5:30 and 5:45 every morning, Monday through Friday. But he avoided the place like the plague on the weekends. I was trying to sell something that I knew wouldn't fly if this guy actually stuck around long enough for no one to show up. And now, he was telling me he wasn't concerned about someone else showing up. Saturday nights are a busy time for convenience stores. But after about 3:30, they become a ghost town. And it was just me and this guy for one extended, uninterrupted, messed up conversation after another. I would try to walk and stalk the cups, lids, and straws, and he would pop up right beside me. There'll be no cups and straws when the Antichrist comes. I arranged the beer and the coffee. There'll be no more coffee when the Antichrist comes. I realize it sounds like a joke, but his panicked eyes and horribly hinting smile made it clear he was dead serious in everything he said. 5 o'clock rolls around. Well, you should probably get going. Don't want that boss man getting mad, you know. The man responded, he won't get mad at you. It's just that he doesn't like people hanging out. We're just talking about the Bible. He said this so sickly sweet, it made my stomach churn. Yeah, but still, he's going to be here soon. I'm not worried about him. I need milk. Okay. I point to the display case. He walks back, grabs a thing of milk slowly, and robotically inspects the carton all the way back to the register. I love milk, he says. Oh, really? Yup. But there'll be no more milk when the Antichrist comes. The devil won't allow that. It's holy sustenance. All right, so at this point I'm sizing the guy up. He's about 5'9", and I'm about 6'4", and I've got at least 100 pounds on him. So if things do go south, I think I can get a few good knocks in before he pulls out my liver and puts it on his head. 5:10 a.m. You should really probably get going. Jesus loves all of his children. 5:15 a.m. The boss is gonna be here really soon, man. I'm not worried about him. 5:20 a.m. Is there anything else you need? The devil is real. And then says my full name to me. This is where two things happen that if I hadn't lived through it, I would have called bullcrap to the person telling the story. At 5:30, for the first time in almost 2 years I had worked there, my boss James comes walking into the store on a Sunday morning. He actually managed to unbluff my bluff with this guy. Secondly, and this is the jaw-droppingly hilarious part, James had been to the beach on Saturday. James had fallen asleep at the beach on Saturday. James had shaved his head, fresh, before going to the beach on Saturday. In other words, just as I told him he would, my boss came walking in at 5:30 a.m., on the dot, with a completely shaved head, his long dark goatee, and bright red skin. To James I say, "What the hell are you doing here?" James responds, "I honestly have no idea." He then looks at the guy. "Who's this?" I didn't answer. I looked at James, I looked at the guy, and then back at James. He looks at the guy. James then says to the guy, "Let's go outside and chat, friend." Less than 10 minutes later, the guy was walking off, and James came back into the store. "So how are you?" I respond, "What was that all about?" James says back, "Oh, Richard. Well, he started telling me about Jesus. I started telling him about witchcraft. He said the Antichrist was coming. I said I was the Antichrist. I overloaded his circuits, I guess. So he left." I love James. I wish this is where this story ended. But 3 months later, I'm outside of my store, smoking a cigarette, with a few regular customers of mine, just chatting away. Somewhere in the distance I hear, "Jesus Lord God help me." I perk up, but the people I'm with don't seem to notice. "Jesus please, I know you can help me." It's closer now, and I'm actually saying, "Oh please don't be Richard. Jesus Christ, come down from heaven and save me. Please, oh please don't be Richard." Sure enough, barreling around the side of the building, and heading in my direction, is a panicked, screaming, sweaty Richard, covered in his own blood. The people I'm with ask the appropriate questions of, holy hell, is he covered in blood? I, on the other hand, had only one thought on my mind, and I repeated it over and over again. Don't go in the store, don't go in the store, don't go in the store, damn it. I crush my cigarette out and run into the store. In the few seconds he has been in there, I now have blood all over the doors, the floors, the rugs, and the countertops. Jesus Christ, please come down and save me. I grab him some towels and toss them in his general direction, trying to get an idea of the nature of his wounds while dialing 911. Now, I can't be sure, because I can't say as I've seen it before, but it looks quite possibly like he tried to crucify himself. All right then, 911. 911, what's your emergency? I have a gentleman in my store who is injured, screaming profanities, yelling about Jesus, and is covered in his own blood. 911 then responds, what? His name is Richard, and I don't know how badly he's hurt, but yeah. I hear the lady on the phone typing away. She asks the store name and the address, etc. All right. And you said that he's screaming profanities. Richard, who can hear the lady on the phone, responds by screaming a very loud profanity. Did you happen to hear that? 911 responds, yes, I did. And you said he's talking about Jesus. Richard, who can still hear her, responds by screaming, Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, please help me. Did you happen to hear that? 911 responds, yes, I did. And then Richard, in all his glory, does the one thing that makes any convenience store clerk go aggro. I turn away from him to give the operator the store incident number, and when I turn back around, Richard is now behind me, behind the register. I drop the phone. Richard, I don't care what's going on with you, man. If you don't get out from behind the counter, I will hang up with 911 and let you bleed to death right here in the store. But the confrontation didn't last long. Before he could respond, there were 4 police officers with me. I thanked the 911 operator, hung up, and left the area. Richard was handcuffed inside of an ambulance, and even the officer said that it appeared that he tried to do something harmful with religious significance. I thanked them for coming so quickly, and we laughed about the strangeness of it all. And then, I'm asked a question that I wish that I hadn't. So who cleans up all the blood? The lead officer responds, that would be you. Story 6. I live in North Wales. For anyone who has had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live. Though for an adolescent boy, it is certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated in comparison to the closest cities, there is a dual carriageway running right along the coast from Wales into England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. There was one night a few years ago, when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore the inside of one of these bridges, as one of the group had observed a manhole cover nearby, which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily, as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be in any danger. but definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver, and panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc and started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you are confused as to what this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it was rather peculiar. I mean, I would never have known there was even an inside, had we not found the manhole cover. So, as we squeeze and crouch, and at one point, scrape along our bellies to the other side of the structure, there is a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point, you can look down through the narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge. One of us claimed that they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair, positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer to it as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page, removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some, as we never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There is easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without somebody taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently, as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing a wall and do God knows what that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation. It has just come to my realization that what we unearthed that night has not once been uttered to another soul. As a naive teenager, it was the type of thing you just wanted to forget. But thinking about it, we probably should have let the police or at least someone know about what was down there, because it wasn't the doings of a healthy-minded individual. Story 7. I am from a small town in Appalachia with a population of less than 7,000. There were about 80 people in my high school class, and people are generally very trusting. This story took place early last September, so it would have been a little less than a year ago. I was a 20-year-old male at the time and had just entered my junior year of college about 3 hours from my hometown. In high school, I had a close cohort of friends. There were about 8 of us that were very close. As things go, things changed when we went to our respective colleges. I felt out of touch with many of them, but I did retain contact with a couple of them. The ones featuring in this story are Mac and Devin. Last September, I got a call from my mother telling me the news. Devin's father had been killed in an accident on his way to work. It was a sudden but brutal collision involving a semi. Devin's family was not from the area. They had moved to my hometown during high school because her father had gotten a job there. Having no family and a dispersed set of friends, she didn't have many people to lean on during this time. Mac contacted me and wanted to know whether I planned on attending the funeral, which had been planned for Friday morning. I had an important class Friday afternoon, but I told him that I would come up that evening and we could occupy Devin. Mac made the 6-hour drive from his college to attend the funeral, and I made it into town later that evening. We decided the 3 of us would spend a few hours at Mac's house. We were just going to hang out, and Mac and I were determined to preoccupy Devin. I got there around 6 o'clock and we jumped right into it. We talked about college, we watched Netflix, and we played board games. Despite the circumstances, it was a pretty good night. I got up to leave about a half an hour after midnight. After some tearful goodbyes, I got in my car. Now for a little geography. Mac's house is a little more than a mile from my parents' house. There are no red lights and one stop sign. At the time of night, I could make the trip in less than 2 minutes. Being in a rural part of Appalachia though, the roads were far from straight. In fact, Mac's house was just off of a winding 2-lane road. There were several blind curves that stop you from seeing what's coming ahead, and there are no guardrails or streetlights to speak of. So, I start off on what I thought would be a brief, uneventful journey home. I pull out of his driveway and start on my way. I drive into the first blind curve and am greeted by something entirely unexpected. I see the car first. It is a white, older model sedan. It is half in my lane and half in a culvert. I have to quickly swerve to avoid hitting it, and I notice a figure waving his arms as I slam on the brakes. I end up stopping on the side of the road. There is no shoulder, so my car is sitting in the road, and the grass is about 100 feet past his car. At this point, I should have kept going and called the police for help when I got home, but this is not what I did. I avoided that feeling in my gut, put my car in park, and opened my door. I stepped outside and immediately noticed the damage to the vehicle. The front end had serious damage. There were no other cars around. So I conclude the driver must have collided with the cliffside on the other side of the road. It is really dark though, so I have a hard time figuring out what happened. By the red light emitted from my taillights, I see the figure approaching me. "Hey buddy, I need some help." "What happened? Is there someone you'd like me to call?" "No, I tried to call my brother, but he didn't answer. He just lives up the road." "Oh, do you want me to call the police?" "No, you can't call the police. I just need my car pulled out of there." He points into the culvert. "I need someone with a truck. My brother has one." He is walking closer to me, and I am beginning to make out some of his features. He is a little bit shorter than me, but he easily has 75 pounds on me. At this point, The little light left me unable to discern much else, except that he was wearing a baseball cap. "Well, I don't have a truck, so I guess I can't help you." I was beginning to feel very uncomfortable. He kept approaching me, and there was something wrong in his voice. A flatness, like he was not emotional at all about the predicament he was in. I started to walk backwards towards my car door. "Drive me to my brother's house. He lives just up the road." He points in the opposite direction of my home as he walks towards my passenger side. I have to get home. My family is expecting me. This is a lie. They all have been asleep for hours, and I was still at Mac's house for all they knew. It'll just take a minute. He lives just up the road. His house is only about a mile away. He keeps progressing. My heart is racing, but I am in a strange predicament. I want to get out of there, but there isn't an ideal way to do it. My car doors are unlocked, and he was getting very close to my car. Being as fast as possible, I couldn't get in and lock the doors before he opened the one on the other side. I certainly couldn't put it in drive and pull away before he put at least some of himself in my passenger seat. Seeing as how he was going to get in my car if he wanted to, I decided to go the cordial route. If this was going to happen, it was going to be on my terms. I knew this road. My sister's boyfriend lived there, and I knew that it was less than a mile from where I currently sat. It was a one-lane road. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe I was about to do a good deed. "Okay, get in." He sits down in my passenger seat about the time I make it into my driver's seat. Since the doors were open, my car's interior lights were on. This was the first good look that I had of him. He was older than me, probably in his late 40s. He was dirty. Very dirty. His hands were greasy. His shirt was full of holes, and there were literally flies congregating around him. My car instantly smelled like body odor and bodily fluids, if you catch my drift. I experienced immediate regret. This was a horrible idea. My parents had taught me about this. My mother was a true crime junkie, and she would always warn about situations just like this. He closes his door, and the lights go out. I make a U-turn and start heading towards the road, and he insists on talking to me, although I would have much preferred the hum of the radio. He asks me my name. He asks me where I live. He asks me what I do. I evade every question I deemed too personal, for I did not want him knowing too much about me. I begin to get the distinct feeling that something is wrong with him. He speaks void of emotion, or any kind of inflection. Sometimes he has a hard time getting the words out. I conclude he is either on a mind-altering substance, or he is playing with less than a full deck of cards. We are turning on the road when he begins admiring my car. It is a fairly nice foreign car that my parents bought for my 16th birthday. He is rubbing the dashboard with his greasy hand before he starts pressing buttons, both on the car and deep in my psyche. This is a nice car. A really nice car. I would kill to have a car like this. I kid you not. He literally said he would kill for my car. I didn't immediately take it as a threat, as there was absolutely no emotion in the statement, and it was a common turn of phrase. Nevertheless, I was getting very uncomfortable. My sister's boyfriend's house is just barely in sight. I am so worked up that I decide I am going to stop there. I am pretty sure I could get a few beats in on his door before this guy attacks me for not taking him to his brother's place. As I approach his driveway, my heart sinks. There are no cars there, and there isn't a garage. No one was home. I am on my own. As we pass the driveway, he says something that catches me off guard. His house is about a mile up ahead. I thought his house was a mile from your car. No, it's a mile from here. Okay. I keep driving, but look at my odometer. I'm giving him 1 mile. That's it. We drive in silence, for which I'm grateful. He's still fondling my dashboard, but I figure I can ignore that. We go about 3/4 of a mile further up this desolate road, when I ask him how much further. I think he can tell that I'm getting irritated, and maybe a bit scared. Just up that way. Turn right. I stop in the middle of the abandoned road. He is pointing to a gravel road on my right. It is barely wide enough for my car, and it shoots steeply up the mountain. He lives a mile up that road. Go that way? There was no way I was about to drive further into this desolate place when it seemed as if he was making up the directions as we went. There was no sign of life up there, and we had already gone further than he had originally said. No, that's as far as we go, I say to him. Get out. No, come on, man. We're almost there. Just turn up that way. I look around, and I have limited options when it comes to a weapon. In fact, I have one option. The previous winter had been a bad one, so I kept a brush ice scraper combo in my floorboard. It was plastic, but decently heavy. The scraper part had a sharp edge. I casually pick it up and sit it in my lap. No, get out. He was very reluctant. My makeshift weapon and the fact that I was literally in the driver's seat caused him to swing his door open. The lights instantly came on, and he turned to look at me squarely in the face. He was grinning, and his teeth looked as if he hadn't seen a dentist since before I was born. Please. This was the first time anything he said had any inflection at all. He said it as if he was trying to sound pitiful. No, I said sternly, and he began to get out of the car. He was in the process of closing the door when he said one more thing. He leaned into the open door and said, I really like your car. He slammed the door, and I took off. It was a 1-lane road, so I couldn't immediately go the direction that I needed to. I went up a couple 100 feet, and turned around in someone's driveway. When I approach where I left him, I see that he has made no progress up this gravel road. In fact, it doesn't look like he moved at all. I slow down when I get close to him. I don't want to risk this man jumping in front of me or something. He stares at me as I pass, and I floor it. As I drive away, I can barely make out that he has started to walk, not up the mountain, not further up that road, but toward the way that I was going, toward the main road. The wrecked car was still there when I drove by, and I went straight home and laid in my bed, too terrified to sleep. Thank you for listening, and I wish you good health. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.